if we can take a question here, if we can get the microphone over here.
Hello? Is this
Oh,
on?
you have it, sorry, my
Hi,
apologies.
Joseph,
And if you could identify yourself.
Joseph Little, DIT. Like a lot of people here today, I suspect I've kind of mixed feelings that I see huge power in digitization or digitalization and the potential to learn and engage with tasks through that, and then also a certain fear about AI or the use of big data and some of those questions. And it's quite interesting. It's a very, we're all probably conflicted in some ways, but we're also engaging to different degrees. Particular thing that really struck me today was that there was an awful lot of talk about how safe people who have a high emotional quotient should be in the future, in that element about human engagement is something which will be tremendously powerful in the future and hopefully cannot be replicated by AI. But I'm also aware that I'm surrounded, let's say, whether third level education or even my own family, by people who have, let's say, a lower emotional quotient. And let's face it, it's quite a male thing. And even then moving on to the spectrum, etc. There's a lot of people who are, wonderful, useful people in society who are not very high on the emotional quotient. Where will they be? Is there anything we can do about that? Whether they're at, 16, like my nephew, or whether they're, 46, and engaging in a place of work.
A very good point, because Siobhan, working in recruitment, it's great to have all these human skills that everybody appreciates. But if you're not in a place that's offering jobs for people with human skills, what happens?
That's what you're finding happening in the Rust Belt in the United States at the moment. And I think that it's appropriate to raise that topic because there's a serious risk attached to it. And when there's no dignity of work for people in society at a particular cohort or particular demographic, then you do have serious issues in the context of social unrest. And it's probably strange to hear someone in the private sector say, well, the value of education is more than just your productivity in a work context. But it is also important to remember that an awful lot of the jobs that we have today didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. And who's to say that other jobs won't exist into the future? It's not all going to be redundant. Life is not linear. It is messy. And I do think that people who contribute to society and the civic element of our participation in society is always going to look towards those persons who aren't being carried along by a wave of technology or a wave of new developments.
Regina, your view on that?
Yeah, look, I think again, it comes back to the diversity piece. So you're going to have a diverse workplace, and that could be people who are, more introverted, and certainly in technology, we've got our share of those who are very, very comfortable with their heads down doing their own work. And I think there's a place for that. I think where leadership comes into place is where you really create inclusive work environments where you make the environment work to open up the discussion and make sure you're not leaving to the side someone who may not be forthcoming with opinions, and you make sure and reach out and ask them. Developers, that you give them a forum, even if that's online, with internal social medias to do that. I think there's tools to be able to bring that out in people. Again, I don't think we're ever going to get to homogeny on it, but I think it falls as well into the educational sector, and how do you, from a pedagogical approach, really help people to not just learn the curriculum, but how they learn it, how they collaborate with others, how they articulate, how they communicate are all critical.
Tom, you were very much looking at that human dimension in your contribution here a few moments ago. Your view of where the space is for the person with that emotional quotient, as it was mentioned there?
I think it is very interesting. The different intelligences and the different balances of intelligences within every person. And every society, I think, needs to find ways of ensuring that those intelligences have ways of being expressed. What I think we don't do very well in Irish education, there's some things we do really well, but I think we are not good at dealing with the differentiated learner on those kinds of issues, like the learner with a very high IQ, but perhaps with a very low EQ, has special needs that need to be addressed. And we're not good at dealing with it. Now, the NCCA has published some really good work on how this kind of differential learning needs to be addressed, and the differential learner needs to be addressed. Generally in Irish education, and like today is so interesting on so many fronts, but it seems to me the digital world we're discussing is telling us that in order for Ireland to operate here, we need competent people. We need people who have secured a level of emotional intelligence, but if they haven't, they have at least managed personal well-being. I mean, I leave you with, I was recently looking at one of the big issues in America now with Donald Trump trying to bring jobs home. There are many reasons why he won't succeed on it. One of them is education levels. But the other one, interestingly, is opiates. And that American employers are increasingly saying robots are much safer than humans because they won't come into work doped or, you know, or whatever else. Now, this is a really serious issue in the States. They began with prescribed opiates, now moving to non-prescribed. So this is driving, mental health is actually driving so much of the agenda around how we go about, you know, the new workplace. And it doesn't answer your question, but it's an important question to keep out there.
Well, I think on that note, I'm going to draw this element to a conclusion. I have to say, I've been personally fascinated by the contributions today. I was coming into this a little bit cold. I mean, obviously, I've had kids who have been through the cycle and of education. I've seen them gradually move on to Bebo, MySpace, Bebo, Facebook. I've seen them now. Mom, you're on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. And all of this. And watching the speed at which it has moved has been incredible. But to hear the contributions today for an outsider like myself about the people who are actually tasked with making that transition happen without collateral damage, because, you know, as you were pointing out in terms of the people who may fall behind because they don't fit into this new model. And Tom talking about the need to safeguard emotional well-being and what have you. I mean, it is just such a multifaceted thing, and it's been a privilege to hear all the contributions. Before we go, I'd like to thank you again for your attention, and I'd like to hand you over to Barbara Kelly, Director of Qualifications at QQI, for her closing remarks.
I think I cut off the technology by my sheer presence up here. It's very difficult to close a conference like today because the breadth and the width has been just so extensive. I think we started off on the agenda talking about digitalisation, but through the contribution of the speakers and yourselves, I think we brought a balance into it, that the people component and the talent component right from this morning was as much evident as was the digitalisation component. And I think when you bring such diverse people together as we have here, in some ways it was obvious, but I think it took the blending and the thinking and the rethinking and so on to get us there. But just for me, and I don't want to delay the timing here because I'm mystified as the fact that all day that we've kept to time, and I don't want to be the one that lengthens it out of control. But just to say a few words, this started very early on this year as a very small idea. You know, we would have a conference or a seminar and so on. But as we discussed it internally, it just kind of got bigger and we got more ambitious and there was just more material to deal with. And then when we start talking to people and seeking their contribution, I have to say that people just volunteered their time, both from the educational world and from the world of business. And I'm not overly IT savvy myself, but I did use LinkedIn significantly to source some of the activities. And I've been promoting it ever since because it's a bit of a surprise that, you know, things work very efficiently and effectively. And it is a very helpful tool in order to network for people, certainly in the space we were interested in, to prepare for something like this. And I think we'll have to consider. And I think of late, QQI has begun to move into that space of social media and tweeting and so on. We have our homegrown experts down below there, Laura, who's beginning the process of tweeting. I think we have a lot of tweets. I think we broke some milestones today. So I don't really want to go back to what's already been said. There's been reflections and so on. But when we did decide to do it, we wanted to make an impact. We wanted to make an impact. We wanted to bring qualifications to the surface, to rethink them, and to move forward from there. And we wanted to see how the classroom and the workplace, in a sense, work together, and will always work together, because recruitment follows learning and so forth. And the whole concept of the pace of change. I mean, today alone, the pace of which we moved in, moved out, moved from presentation to presentation in itself is a demonstration that things are moving at pace. And that classrooms are learning zones themselves, but they're also workplaces. And that workplaces are also learning zones. So in some ways, the barriers are already broken. But when we were talking about how to make an impact, I think it was Stephen this morning, I never even thought of the words that would be a hot topic. I think he introduced the word, it was kind of hot, kind of sexy topic. And that wasn't necessarily the reason why we chose it. We chose it on the basis that it would bring people together to talk about a particular subject matter. But I think what we've learned, certainly what I've learned today, is that the real contribution of digitalisation in terms of qualifications, or in terms of the workforce, is, as I mentioned, the balance, the working together. That the future of work is not just about digitalisation, it's how we can manage it, how we can make best use of it, and that includes in terms of inclusion, working with people with disabilities. I mean, years and years ago, people who I know are fed up with saying, we adapted typewriting to text production on the basis to include people with disability who couldn't use hands. So that sense of change is more moving apace. And that people who are looking at television and they can't walk, remote controls, they were invented for other reasons, but they're a more inclusive device than we actually consider. The talent element and the modernisation, the talent in terms of people, and I think it was Peter mentioned it this morning in great detail, and the development of people, I think is key to work hand in hand with digitalisation and technology. So I think qualifications in their various forms, be they badges or certificates or diplomas, they do have a future. Of course, I would say that somewhere along the line. But the modernisation and the embracing of that technology, that the education and training system has to keep pace. But then the workplace has to keep the people, has to retain them. And to retain them, they have to adapt their policies and procedures and so forth, just like the educational system, in order to develop and maintain itself. My child's classroom is a lot different than my classroom, just going back to the last thing. There's audio-visual equipment, there's IT equipment, it's well-resourced. I use chalk, as a teacher, as a student, I used. So things are rapidly changing. Obvious stuff and some broader stuff. Somebody mentioned earlier on this morning that data was born digitally. I can't remember who said it, but I thought that was a very interesting point, that we sometimes underestimate the fact that we do a lot of holding and processing and then we print, myself included. Nobody knows my desk. Well, some people here know my desk. It's full of paper. I will learn from that going forward. But the competencies, we talked about competencies and teachers and parents, I would suggest, versus kids. I mean, they are completely at different paces, or different ends of the pitch in terms of digitalisation. But we have to balance that, as you mentioned, the emotional intelligence of people, young people being able to catch up, and that time to mature as teachers and so forth before they are actually, in a sense, fully embedded into the broader classroom environment. We had a big ask today of people. We started early, quarter to 9. I think went through 19 different speakers, though you wouldn't know it from the interest and the silence in the room, but I think there were 19 speakers prior to now. And the time management, we couldn't have done what we did today, even though we're running a little late now, other than we managed time. Well, we didn't, Ingrid did. Managed time professionally. She did tell me that she was using the mobile to do it. So we had assistance, Ingrid had assistance in doing that. But that is a big issue, or a big contribution, I think, to the success of today. I am, or we are, I think, relieved a bit, I must say. Not that the day is over. I think we could have carried on. I'm quite willing to do so. But that we did finish on time as we promised you, more or less, and that the ICT worked. We did have our concerns, I will admit. And then the third one is that the hotel didn't run out of food, because we were so inundated with people coming, even at the last moment. I mean, we had up to about 400 people registered at one stage, and we turned registration on and off and on and off just to try to manage it a bit. And that has taught us a lot in terms of how we go forward and what we run and how we run it and how we bring people together. And it has increased our confidence, obviously, in doing it, and we hopefully can predict better in terms of the future, in terms of numbers and themes and so forth. And finally, just one thing before I do my thank yous, and that is we will do a survey for today. I forgot the specifics. And we will send out an electronic survey. We wish to get your feedback, and we're very keen to learn specifically from the vast number of people here, from the broad spectrum that you come from. And that we will also, because we do think that the contributions today were meaningful, the agenda was meaningful, that we will publish conference proceedings. So we will have a document going, to record as a record of today in particular, because I think the nature of the discussions and so on, in fact, we're going to have to try to capture the conversation and the dialogue as much as the presentations. Finally, I'd just like to say thank you, because I don't want to run too much over time. I would like to thank you sincerely to all the speakers from 8:45 this morning, all 19 speakers. I'm not going to name them individually, but I thank them. If some of them are still here, I know our current panel is. For the hotel and the audio-visual, as I say, I crossed my fingers and so on many times, but it all worked. And to the QQI staff here. They've been here early this morning. There's been a big team of people here, and I thank them for moving people, for working with people, and for keeping their eye on everything. Specifically, I'd like to thank Alison and Beata and John, because between the three of them in particular, but I mean there's many, many more, they in a sense brought today together, going back for the last months, even far back as January to some degree. Thank you. It was a big investment of time, not only on our side, but on the contributors as well. And as I say, we're very, very happy with the amount of contributions we got, and from yourselves. I'd like to thank Ingrid. I mentioned timekeeping, but broader, her engagement with the topic, her particular interest in the topic. She says she learns from each experience, and hopefully this was one of them. So thanks a million, Ingrid. And finally, I'd like to thank yourselves, because from the point of registration all the way through to completion, you've shown a sincere interest in this, a deep commitment to it, and a contribution that we would like, in a sense, to keep this dialogue and this discussion going in your workplaces and certainly in our workplaces. So thanks a million, and safe home.